Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with the mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Jorge Tubella. He's a creative technologist who combines his interests in robotics, artificial intelligence, and design to research construction technology systems. He was a founding member and formerly the coordinator of the Robotics and Digital Fabrication Lab at Florida International University. And currently, he's a construction technologist specialist at Haskell Construction. Welcome to the show, Jorge.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So how did you get into the construction industry?
Sure. So my family has two generations on the back end of construction. My grandfather and my father, and currently my brother were in the construction industry. So I kind of grew up around that industry, working as manual laborers, learning the trades, things of that sort. Um, Throughout my education, I saw that architecture would have been a nice uh, addition to my family's business. So I went to architecture school and I started, hammering away there, doing all my work. And through that process, I got interested in technology. So I started researching, different types of small robotics, Arduinos, things of that sort. And I built a couple of my projects, including the technology, models that moved, responding to sensory data, things of that sort. Through there, I got involved with a grant with my former boss, Shaheen Vasig, and we built the robotics lab. So one of the things that we were trying to address is how is technology playing a role in the construction industry or the AEC sector. From there, I saw the immediate bridge into physical use of these robots on site or prefabrication, and I made the leap to go into construction. So that's where I'm at recently right now.
Nice. Thanks for the background there. So I'd like to drill down a little bit more. How does an architect go full contact? Was it just the technology piece that kind of pulled you in, or what was about all that pulled you into the context space?
Sure. So it was in part technology and just kind of riding that wave that I've always seen around, and a combination of that and always liking to build things. I've always been handy. I used to build furniture with my father. I'd like to assemble things, fix things, tinker around. So and having that background in working construction, I saw how closely we could match some of the trades to using this type of technology. That is not necessarily just physical use of robotics on site, but it's also software related, things of that sort that I jumped into afterwards. So that's kind of how I connected those dots.
Nice. So being in the educational and the researching side of technology, how has that really impacted your view on the potential of contact?
I think that being on the research side, on the academic side for a few years, I've definitely seen the interest grow in this type of technology. There has been a huge influx of people that are trying to get involved with the lab on a large range of projects and trying to solve for their particular case. The interesting part that I've seen in the last 2 years is the romanticized version of what academic research is and the implementation on an industry. So there's a lot of good ideas that come from the university to create solutions. But there's a disconnect between how those solutions are actually used on field. There's a whole world out there of how technology is actually implemented on site or in practice.
Yeah. So what really is that difference between the kind of the theoretical research side of things and then the practical reality of how it is really being implemented, the technology part in the field?
Sure. The theoretical portion in academic research is largely based on developing minimal viable products or proof of concepts. So once we reach that stage, we typically look for additional funding or some type of company to pilot it on. And that's just the startup portion of it. Now, the disconnect is the rollout into actual service or industry, where they're looking for fully functional products that can be implemented immediately. This is there's a lot of variables that are attached to that, but bottom line is how much money are they going to make? so that's what they're interested in. Through my time at the university, we had the opportunity to receive a $1 million grant. We had a huge team helping on that, very, very talented team of about 30 faculty members from all over the university: computer engineering, architecture, construction, you name it, they were there. And in this grant process, or the development of a minimal viable product, and I'll get into that in a second, we held a symposium just to kind of get a bearing on what the industry was like, get a tap on their receptiveness to technology, because traditionally AEC is not the fastest adopting in technology. And one thing that we learned there, which was pretty evident, was that industry is looking for solutions that are ready to roll out, that are easy to integrate into their whole ecosystem, and not necessarily looking for testing out minimal viable products or risking any type of change to their bottom line because of a new technology to roll out.
Mm-hmm. So how do you bridge that gap then in pushing maybe a new innovative product or technology that will change the industry? That research is proving that it's going to make a big impact, but it hasn't been proved necessarily on the practical, on the job site side. So how do you get them to kind of buy in and be those early adopters when they're wanting that hard proof that it's going to work and it's not that big of risk, even though it might be? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. No,
How do you
it makes
message it?
perfect sense. No, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And to be quite frank with you, it's people that are willing to risk. There are people that are willing to try this out. People
Mhm.
who are companies that are willing to put money in to try something out with a risk that it will be a loss or a bust. There, and you're seeing that trend spike up in the industry at the moment. There's a lot of companies out there that either have a venture capitalist arm or an innovation department or some type of department focusing on technological solutions. And there is a moment where they have to go out to look at startups or universities to find these solutions and take that leap of faith and try to pilot it and see what it is. And then that collaboration between industry, academic industry, startup, is what grows a product to where it needs to be. There's
Mhm.
going back to what I was mentioning earlier, at least on the academic side, is that romanticized version of what a product should be, that quickly gets quashed with understanding the realizations of it. And that process only happens when there's collaborations between these two entities: academia, research, startup side, and industry.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So on the research side of things, what's the makeup of people coming into that space? Are they coming from the field, or do they have the background in academia, or is there a mix there somehow?
Okay. Yeah, it's a mix of the two. It's largely based on academic researchers, where they tap into people who are in industry. So we use our contacts, we leverage our contacts in the industry. In the department that I was, the Department of Architecture, they have practices. Most faculty have practices, and so they reach out to people in the industry. In construction, same is true. So they reach out to industry partners, and also in the computer engineering side of things. So they really bring people that have this industry knowledge into the mix, and more of a consultant role to guide us, making sure that we don't hit barriers that are going to be, just revoked off the bat. So making sure that we're going in the right direction to actually research something that is viable and that can be eventually implemented into the field.
Yeah, I love that. I'm reading a book right now called The Art of Innovation, and it's I think I might have mentioned it to you before we started
Yeah.
recording, but it's an incredible book, and they talk about the need and the importance of having these different perspectives from people outside of the industry, people inside the industry, people from very different backgrounds, and all the stuff of how that really fosters a climate for innovation, and to kind of springboard off of each other, because you get those different viewpoints and perspectives, and somebody that's willing and okay with asking the dumb question because that's not their space, and how there's so much innovation that happens from those people asking those kind of elementary questions that people that are in it day in and day out totally overlook and don't think about. So that kind of makes me think of what you were just saying of having people from different departments and different backgrounds and stakeholders in on the research side of things. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I actually just got. I had to go. I got to go downstairs and pick up my copy. I ordered one to read it, so I can't wait to get to that chapter. And 100% is it's a very organic process. You know, especially with a grant, you do have parameters with grant, and especially dealing with organizations like the National Science Foundation, which is what we received our grant. But the development, when you're actually in there, is a very organic process because what you initially start off with and plan, and it's extensive planning, turns out many times to not be the end result. You know,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. That's an excellent thing because you're growing off of that. And those questions that are asked by, for example, a computer engineer coming and saying, "What does this role or what does this piece of technology play in architecture? You know, why do they need this?" Allows us in the department to reflect on that and give a answer that makes sense because there's a lot of assumptions sometimes that take place, and either those assumptions are outdated or they're just wrong, you know, and you're proving that throughout the process, this organic process of bouncing back ideas.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of taking off on that kind of grant mindset aspect on the research side, how would you encourage organizations to pull that into their workflow and mindset to test it and have a space where people can be free to test and collaborate and try new technologies like in the grant process so that when they're able to kind of find those hidden mysteries of, oh, we didn't expect it to do this, but that's okay. That's an awesome benefit, like what you're just saying.
Well, if are you talking on the academic side or the industry side?
On the industry side, how
On the
how can
industry
you
side,
pull that
okay.
mindset into the industry?
So on the industry side, I think a great way of doing that is really reaching out to universities in this case and setting parameters for a project. You know, so a lot of times it's a university that comes up with an idea and they just kind of roll out with it, and then they look for consultants, and then they kind of have that barrier paradigm that I was describing.
Mhm.
But it would be a completely different source if there was a use case for it in off the bat, solve for X, you know, and the initial grant could be from the industry partner that can fund a minimal viable product that could lead to a grant that can get, you know, federal funding, et cetera, to develop that. And then you're, you know, now you're cooking. Now
Mhm.
you got something working, something that is already addressing an industry problem and working through that whole process. It allows you to build up your team correctly. It allows you to really identify the problem statement. It allows you to form a articulate thesis and then work off of that.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
so that would be my recommendation. A lot more engagement from industry with the through the lens of there is risk associated, but
Mhm.
the return might not be financial initially, but the return will definitely be knowledgeable and knowing what succeeds, what fails, etc.
Yeah. And risk doesn't have to be a bad thing. I know it has a negative connotation to it, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. There's a lot of awesome, great things that come from risking something.
That's right. Fortune favors the bold.
That's right. Absolutely. So let's kind of dive into the training aspect of it. You have a good technology piece. It's ready to be pushed out into the field. What makes for that effective training, and then how do you prepare people for the necessity that you're going to have to adapt on the fly as the need arises on the job site?
Okay. Well, I can kind of talk you that through the grant and how we saw that. So the grant was to create a minimal viable product of a training simulation to teach robotics to the AEC industry. So we did a 45-minute simulation that's in virtual reality. The team worked day and night to get it done. We had a really tight deadline. As a matter of fact, that's where it came up because it was kind of working in part with IDEO. So
Uh,
that's where that book reference came up. So they had this particular National Science Foundation project was making sure that academia was working with industry, which is why we had our partners come in. So our industry partners come in. So throughout this process, it was completely different. It wasn't a traditional fast, a traditional slow-paced research project. It was a very fast-paced research project, kind of solving and pivoting to solve the problems. So we created this virtual reality simulation to teach the fundamentals of robotic arm. We had a KUKA robotic arm inside the virtual environment, and you basically just learn how to manually jog the robot and do some preliminary programming points with it. And the idea of that was using transferred knowledge to bring it over to an actual physical robot. So we had a funny case study where our dean of the college came in to test out the simulation. I wouldn't necessarily say he's the most technologically advanced person, you know. So when he put on this headset, he immediately took into it. It was a very guided process, and at the end, we gave him the controller to the physical robot, and he was able to transfer it right over. And
Nice.
we rolled out a whole study on this, and we've published papers on this using students to go through this process. So in 45 minutes, he was able to do what took me about a week to do in Michigan, training at the KUKA headquarters. So I think
Wow.
that's a huge, huge advancement in training.
Yeah.
And this was one module in something that we were developing at the university called micro-credentialing. So micro-credentialing has three levels. At its base level, you have your actual micro-credential, where it is a course that you can take, which is 6 to 12 hours, depending on the content. You
Mhm.
take about three of those courses and you move up to a micro badge. And then after two or three of those micro badges, you can move up to a micro degree. And this is actually where we're seeing a trend in education taking place right now. So it's not necessarily looking so much to a long-term degree, but mostly specializing in a certain type of skill. And for us, that skill was in this pilot fundamentals of robotic arms and understanding safety, anatomy, etc.
Yeah. Really interesting. I think that's a cool trend, that the micro credentialing. What, from your vantage point, what's the main kind of value of knowing someone's really exact expertise on particular skills?
I think the value of it is that you can instantly roll them out into a particular role and have them perform in that role. Not necessarily having to do a whole onboarding procedure extensive to do a general task, but you
Uh,
can directly make them the specialist of that task. Um, and I think more and more as you know this technological revolution that's happening in the AAC space is going on. I think that's going to play a more prominent role. You're going to start seeing specialists in, well, you already know there's BIM managers, things of that sort in firms, but you'll start seeing specialists in other technologies, specialists in virtual reality, specialists in 3D printing, specialists in fabrication processes. And these specializations can roll out from that micro credentialing. So instead of having to get a 4-year degree in process automation or something like that, you can get this micro credential that'll lead up to a micro degree and then be a specialist in that field in a quarter of the time.
yeah. Interesting. Do you think it pigeonholes somebody into this particular, like, this is what they're known for, and they kind of get, they stay in that sphere? Or does it actually provide the flexibility, because you can kind of concentrate over here if this is what you're interested in, and then if you want to go into the VR space, then you go over here and you can micro credential in that, and then you can kind of pop around without having to spend all the time in 4-year traditional degree program?
Right. Well, I think that's a loaded question there because it depends on the organization and also the person. I'd like to think that the people that are trying to look for these micro credentialings or these specializations are people who want to learn about these technologies and don't necessarily want to be pigeonholed. And I mean, obviously that'll be left to the company that they're working for, but I believe that if that company is utilizing that person who has that drive inside them, there's a lot of lateral moves that can be happening, and
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to be one person that is a king of the technology. It can be one person that is specializing in that, and then cross talking with another person and really seeing collaboration points. Nothing lives in silos, So, for example, this micro credentialing that we were talking about, if we decided to do that just with a physical robot, that would be one thing, but we decided to integrate virtual reality into it. So that could be a case study for a company working on creating their own micro credentialing. So they have their VR specialist working in part with their robotics specialist, and then that cross contamination and collaboration really makes a lateral spread to it. So now the roboticist could be a virtual reality specialist and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an interesting dynamic because I think on the surface, it seems like it could potentially pigeonhole somebody, but I think it actually brings a lot of flexibility to
Hmm.
the situation. If everybody on board has the right mindset, that's what it is, because you have that freedom to kind of go where your interests are and specialize, and then you can really become kind of that jack of all trades and go into areas that you're really passionate about. And company is able to see that, accept that, and then harness that, they could go really far and do some really cool things by unleashing all that passion of their employees in areas that they want to go into.
I agree completely. Mind you, this is a opinion of somebody who has worked in academia for a while and was rewarded on innovation and doing lateral moves and taking initiatives to go to learn new technologies and things of that sort, which really equipped me with the lens of being able to combine these technologies and connecting dots that would otherwise be unseen because you get pigeonholed.
Mhm.
So I definitely think that there is something there, and if the company is hiring these people and on the innovation route, they can definitely see have a little bit of foresight in seeing somebody being able to connect these dots in their own organization.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So over the last couple of years, from your vantage point, how have you seen the perception of contact really change in the industry?
I've seen it change dramatically, especially these last 2 years have been extremely interesting because of the pandemic. So a lot of technology got fast forward. There's talks about when I was leaving the lab, we were talking about conducting research projects on teleoperation. So how can you control a piece of equipment without necessarily being on site?
Mhm.
Things of that sort. So the ability for construction companies to find these technological solutions has really been fast tracked because of the circumstances that we've been under. So over the last 2 years, it's grown tremendously. There's been a lot more interest. We've seen people from computer engineering coming over to us, trying to talk to us. We see, we have a wave of students that we're trying to intern at the laboratory, trying to get an opportunity to bring their piece of or their idea and realize it, or join us in support of one of our projects that we had going on at the lab at a time. And this is the wave of people that are going to be coming out and really affecting the industry. There's another there's another aspect to it which I find extremely interesting because of the deficit that we have in labor in the construction industry, because it's always known to be a manual laborious job and not necessarily requiring too much intellectual exercise in it. That's trend is starting to change.
Mhm.
What is a construction worker looking 10 years from now, 5 years from now? Will they be an operator of robotics? Will they be doing their meetings with owners through virtual reality? Will they be able to implement artificial intelligence into their workflow to optimize their processes? So now you're starting to get these people who are, in my experience, that are coming into the lab trying to pilot these programs or join the research projects that are rolling out into the industry, and that'll be the next wave of technology, or that'll be the next wave of people that are implementing technologies and really making this field something that is more interesting than it's been in the last, couple decades.
Mhm. I
Before.
more than agree with that. I say it all the time. I think that we are right at the beginning of the golden age of construction here, and it's such an exciting time to be in and around this industry. The growth potential is huge. The innovation and the technology and the mindset that is coming into this industry is it's very exciting and invigorating for me, at least. I think that the potential is astronomical right now.
Definitely, 100%. And it makes me very passionate at what I do. I'm just glad to be at, kind of base camp for this,
Yeah,
moving forward.
that's awesome. Is there a particular trend that you're seeing that you think is going to help kind of shape the industry this year?
Uh, Not necessarily so much. What I've noticed throughout my time is there's a lot more SaaS-based solutions
Uh,
rather than physical solutions, and there's reasons for that. SaaS based is or software based is very easy to pilot, roll out, integrate into your system. You don't necessarily have to have too much buy-in from everybody, especially the people that are working on site, but more so for people who are already in that space, working in the office, trying to find actual solutions to it. So we see a lot of SaaS-based solutions. The robotic side of it is a little bit more difficult. Dexterity, a lot of these solutions nowadays are using technology that hasn't really improved since the 60s. And I'm talking about robotic arms, 6-axis manipulators. So these are some of the startups that you see out there. Or, some type of roaming robot that does some type of work on site.
mhm.
Now, the problem with that is sites are completely unstructured environments. So, and there's people walking around, there's things, falling, there's things that were there one day and things that are not. So that side is, I hope, trends in the right direction. And I think right now we're starting to see a lot of marriage between technologies that have been produced for other industries and injecting themselves into the construction industry as solutions.
Yeah.
So my my idea or my thoughts on that are in the next couple up and coming years, we're going to start seeing more on-site solutions, more robotic solutions, more physical solutions that could either enable, assist, help one of the laborers there to not necessarily do as much work as they normally would, which can kind of minimize that gap of labor deficiency that we were speaking about, or completely take out one of those jobs that don't necessarily want to be done by a laborer to allow them to focus where they would be best, where humans do their work best.
Mhm. Nice. Well, if you could kind of snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would it be?
probably the probably the robotics part, probably having the mundane repetitive jobs being completely automized,
Mhm.
having a smaller labor force that is really targeting critical parts of the job site and having the rest of the job site completely automated. And in my head, in my crazy head, I think of a transformer like robot, that it just detaches and comes out. There's certain parts of a robot that come out and go do something, and then they come back in and they form with other pieces of robotics hardware, and they go out and that those modules go and do another task, and
Yeah.
having the complete site automated with documentation, fabrication, all that stuff. So but that's a pipeline dream. That's a pipeline dream. But if I could snap my fingers, that'd probably be it.
I love it. I see that. I see that vision. I think there's something there to it. I like it. Well, how do people find out more information and connect with you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I love talking to people. Just having a conversation. I'll have a Zoom meeting with anybody to talk about my ideas and thoughts and how I can help the industry.
Awesome. Well, final question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation to me means a better future and a more prosperous future for not only construction but for every industry.
I like it. Where transformers rule the job site.
Yeah, we'll get Optimus Prime, not Megatron.
There you go. Yeah. Choose your transformer carefully. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining the show today, Jorge. Really appreciate it. This is great.
Thank you, Todd. I really appreciate you having me here.